Hello and welcome to The Obscure, a podcast describing interesting people that deserve to be better known. We take interesting characters from history, out of obscurity and into the limelight, focusing on a different character every episode. I'm Daniel Darkens.
And I'm Nina Bickerton. We will be producing a new episode every fortnight, landing wherever you get your podcasts on a Saturday morning, if you're in the UK. Subscribe so that you don't miss each new episode.
Hello everyone. Nina is taking a little bit of time out, so I have got a very special guest joining me today. It is my very dear friend, Minna Hayman. Hello Minna, how are you doing today?
Hello Daniel, I'm all right. Feeling very warm. Summer is definitely here. So I hear that you're sharing the same thing.
It's pretty warm over here in England as well. My thermometer is showing 36 degrees centigrade here at the moment indoors. So it's pretty warm for both of us, I think. But I'm really pleased to have you here.
So you have looked up a very, very interesting person that you want to tell me about, as your usual interest in history always has been very keen. So who are we discussing?
We've got a wonderful person today to talk about, Minna. We've got somebody called John Mytton, better known as Mad Jack Mytton. But before I get into the life and times of Mad Jack Mytton, I'm actually going to start with how I came across the name in the first place. Firstly, he is the perfect person for you and I to be discussing. I first encountered the name Mad Jack while I was in the town of Clun in Shropshire. And for our listeners, Minna and I both stayed in Clun in 2017 as part of a group of cyclists riding from Land's End to John O'Groats. I noticed a sign for the Jack Mytton Way, and I wondered who on earth Jack Mytton was to actually get a long distance path named after him. Although my interest was piqued, I couldn't really follow up on that straight away. But when I looked into it, turns out this path, it really is a long distance path. It's nearly 100 miles long, 150 kilometres, and covers a lot of the Shropshire countryside south of Shrewsbury. It's aimed mainly at horse riders, off-road cyclists and walkers if they're intrepid enough. It's a long way to walk.
Well, the neighborhood definitely has hills, so it usually requires some effort for sure.
It was quite a hilly part of the world, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Quite hilly, but quite picturesque, really beautiful place to live, isn't it? The Shropshire's Great Outdoors website describes it as a 5 to 7 days horse ride, which sounds fair enough. But it's a pretty intrepid trek. So I was interested who this Mytton was, and I found a biography of him by somebody called Nimrod, and that is going to be the basis for my description. I discovered that this Mad Jack definitely deserved to be called Mad Jack. He was completely bonkers. But when I then also discovered that there's another long-distance bridle way close by in the same county that's called the Humphrey Kynaston Way, which seems to be named after a local murderer and highwayman.
Okay.
I wanted to know, how did they come up with these names? I've worked for a council before now, and the council I worked for would not have been naming footpaths after highwaymen. So I actually got in touch with the council, Shropshire County Council, and heard from a really helpful officer at the council who did a bit of digging around for me to try and work out where the names had come from. And when he came back to me, he said that he had found out that the local horse riding community had been consulted and it was them that had come up with the name.
Oh.
So it was the local horse riders.
Okay.
But I'm so chuffed that the council and the horse riders between them came up with these two wonderful names. I also found out there was a racehorse called Mad Jack Mytton that ran up until I think it was about October 2020, and that actually raced at Ludlow racetrack.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to turn out that Mad Jack owned racehorses, and his horses also raced and won at Ludlow. So there's a lovely little closing of the circle there.
Have you, by any chance, did you check your presence in any of the race courses since you like the sport so much? Have you possibly seen Mad Jack.
Do you know what?
You should check your ticket stubs and see whether you have actually seen the Paul.
I think there's a very good chance that it didn't even occur to me. I know the horse called Mad Jack Mytton ran at the Cheltenham Festival.
Well, there.
I was going to the Cheltenham Festival every year from about 2012 up until 2020.
So, for sure.
So the chances are I actually did see Mad Jack Mytton run if at the Cheltenham Festival, if not anywhere else.
Yeah,
I'm going to have to check where.
The four-legged kind.
Yes, indeed. But let's get into the two-legged Mad Jack.
Yeah.
So I'm relying completely on this biography written by Nimrod, and quite often when you read biographies, they're by people that are writing long after or very distant from the person they're writing about.
Mm-hmm.
But Nimrod was a friend of Jack's. He was there for some of the stories that he talks about. In fact, it's quite funny in that the elements where Nimrod wasn't there, he just writes a paragraph.
Okay.
And then some of the other stuff where he was there, he'll write pages and pages.
Makes sense.
Which I guess makes sense. But when it's things like talking about his first wife, yeah, he married this woman and then she died. And that's all she gets. And then it's like, oh, and then when he bought this horse, you've got page after page after page of description of that.
Priorities, baby.
Exactly. This would have been written in the 1830s, and books had wonderful titles in the 1830s, didn't they? And this book was no exception. It had the snappy title of The Life and Death of the late John Mytton, Esquire of Houston, Shropshire, formerly MP for Shrewsbury, High Sheriff of the counties of Salop and Merioneth, and Major of the North Shropshire Yeomanry Cavalry.
Okay.
So much better a title than just something like Jaws.
Well, yeah. Takes a very, very long spine if you want to have the whole title there, though.
Yeah, it's quite. Yeah, as opposed to the life and death of any other John Mytton, Esquire.
Yeah.
So let's talk about who the chap was. Firstly, he was born into a very wealthy aristocratic family. Mm-hmm. He was born on the 30th of September, 1796.
Okay.
The family was, as I say, it was an aristocratic family. They had roots in Shropshire going back many centuries. There were some lovely names in some of the older people, though. Reginald de Mytton was a bailiff of Shropshire back in the late 14th century, but a predecessor of his was called Everard de Mytton. And he died in the anarchy, so in the 1150s. He died in 1154.
So it's a real old family.
So it's a proper old family, yeah. Absolutely. He was born at Halston Hall. He was called John Mytton when he was born, but it seems like most of the people, until you go back to the Everards and so on, half the family seem to have been called John. So he was called Jack from an early age, and then obviously Mad Jack when he started showing strange exploits. So I'm going to call him Mad Jack rather than
about him anyway, John. So
Exactly. Now, his dad was called John as well, but he died when young Jack was just 2 years old.
Okay.
He was the sole inheritor.
Yeah.
So that meant he now owned Halston Hall. He had an income which is the equivalent today of more than £1 million a year. And he was 2 years old.
Okay. You get a really fancy rattle with that.
Now, he was looked after. His mum was still around. His mum actually outlived him. But he would have had a ward. There would have been people looking after, certainly looking after the fortune. So he'd have been given allowances and stuff rather than the whole $1 million a year to blow whatever he wanted. But he went off to school. He was sent to the very best schools, got expelled from the very best schools. He wasn't a very good student. He went to Westminster School, which is a very well thought of school, Harrow, which is one of the top public schools. The only note I've got of his time at Westminster School, he spent double his allowance in the short time he was there before he was expelled. So he would have been given a very generous allowance, but he still managed to spend twice as much as that. So he was getting into debt even when he was just a schoolboy. It's said that he was entered on the books of both Oxford and Cambridge universities. But he was very dead against the idea of going to university. But it looked like he was going to attend Cambridge University. So he did send some supplies of port to be ready for him when he got there. And the amount that Nimrod says he sent was 3 pipes of port.
Is it a measure? Because I've heard of like the old-fashioned measures. There was a hogshead of something or whatever. What is a pipe?
Well, I thought exactly the same thing. What is a pipe? And 3 pipes sounded quite modest to me.
Yeah.
So I looked up the amount, and it does vary depending on which definition you look at. But the general consensus seems to be that a pipe is 720 bottles.
Okay, that's quite a pipe.
So to see him through Cambridge, those 3 pipes would have been more than 2,000 bottles of port.
That is a very, very interesting way of starting your student. Like, do you fit into your room?
Where would they have kept that?
Yeah.
To give an indication of just how much he was looking forward to going to university, he was actually having a conversation with a friendly chaplain whilst he was up in Shropshire. And the chaplain said to him, "My good sir, you must go to Oxford. You must indeed, sir." And Mytton said, "I'll see you blank first. Upon my word, sir, you must go. Every man of fortune ought to go to Christchurch, if only for a term or so." "Well then, if I do go, I will go on the following terms." "What are they, sir?" "Why, that I never open a book."
That's a way to
Not the least
approach
occasion.
university studies.
Absolutely. But it gets better, because the chaplain says, "Not the least occasion, not the smallest, I assure you." So Mytton then says, "Very well then, I don't mind going, providing I read nothing but the racing calendar and the stud book." "Excellent book, sir. They will do very well indeed."
That's a very interesting approach from a chaplain.
But to make a man of him, he joined the army as a cornet and served from the ages of 19 to 23. This might have been the sanest he was throughout his life, though, because he joined the cavalry just towards the end of 1815.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well,
which was just after we had the Battle of Waterloo. So this would have been 2 or 3 months after that he joined up. I don't think he saw any action or any enemy. When I say didn't see any action, he didn't see any military action. I think he played lots of cards. I think he got in some fights with his fellow soldiers, but I don't think he ever met anybody from the other side.
Okay, well, probably if he got into a couple of fights with his fellow soldiers, at least he got some fisticuffs or whatever.
Now, Nimrod wasn't with him in the army, so that's basically all we know. He was there for 4 years.
Okay.
He didn't get involved in any battles with anybody other than his own mates.
Mm-hmm.
And he played a lot of cards. Then we go straight from there to, in the same year as he left the army, he got married to somebody called Harriet Emma Jones.
Mm-hmm.
She gave him a daughter and then died very shortly after that. She died in 1820.
Okay.
Now, he only left the army in 1819.
All
so
right.
she
rather short-lived then.
So he married her, had a daughter, and lost the first wife. The daughter,
Mm-hmm.
having lost her mother, was sent off to live with somebody else, which would have definitely been for the best for the daughter.
I think so. It sounded like a guy taking care of a 1-year-old.
I don't think he would have been a particularly responsible father, let's put it that way. He did then get married just over a year after his first wife had passed away, and his second wife, Caroline, she lasted quite a lot longer. But she could only put up with him until 1830. She had children on a regular basis. They had pretty much a child every year from 1822 to 1827. But I think when she upped and left him, she did take there were 3 children surviving. 2 of them had passed away, but 3 of the children had survived and took them with her. So what that means is that in 1830, he was now back on his own. One of the things that does kind of make me smile, though, is that I've noted here that she seems to have been a far better wife to him than he was a husband to her, because Nimrod himself writes that she said to Nimrod one evening, "I cannot help loving him with all his faults."
Yeah.
Which, you girls, you do love a wrong 'un.
I think that there is some note of long suffering in that statement.
Yes. So he did also have a sister, a younger sister, but she passed away in 1826. So by the time he was in his late 20s, very early 30s, he was now reached his majority. So there was no more allowance. He had his hands on the full family fortune. He was the only person left other than his mother, who was away just being like a dowager, if you like. So he had a vast fortune at his disposal. He had a lovely pad to call home, Houston Hall. He had a large staff to look after him. And it looked like he was minded to make the most of things. He was going to enjoy life. According to Nimrod, his biographer, he was a good-looking man with strong arms and a stronger demeanour. So he did get into fights every now and then. But it seems like he got into fights in a proper way. We're not talking pub brawls here. We're talking sort of, Queensberry rules fights.
Okay.
Because there was a Welsh miner who basically spoiled a hunt that he was involved in. So Mytton offered him out for a fight, and they went 20 rounds. So it was a fight, but it was a fight of, right, that's the 3 minutes up, stop.
Yeah,
Seconds.
it sounds like there must have been somebody regimenting it, considering the fact that if they counted the rounds and so forth.
But apparently after 20 rounds, the miner submitted. But Mytton was such a good sport that he gave the miner 10 shillings and a hare. So he was a very keen hunter. And I'm not going to go too far into it, but basically, just to summarise it, if it could be chased on horseback, he would chase it on horseback. If it could be shot at, he would shoot at it. He loved all of the thrill of the chase. But he loved it so much, he would get so intent that if he started to get a little bit overheated with all the exertion and all the excitement, he would basically just cast off clothes along the way. And he would wear the finest silk clothes, silk breeches, lightweight boots. But by the time he got home, he was often quite nearly naked. And I think it was quite lucrative just following after him, just to pick up his discarded valuable silk shirts and stuff. You'd have probably had some...
You can imagine that the county mothers would have been locking up the daughters, sort of like, the Mad Jack is riding again. Like, avert your eyes.
Absolutely. Nimrod said that on one occasion, he followed some ducks onto the ice. So on a frozen lake, followed some ducks on a frozen lake, stark naked. And it must have been a bit nippy if it was a frozen lake that he was on, but escaped with perfect impunity.
Oh, God.
Now, we know from the fact that he sent a lot of port off to Cambridge that he enjoyed a glass of port, and I'll get more into that. But it seems like he was slightly eccentric on the eating habits as well. Because he and a friend left London together in a carriage with 18 pounds of filbert nuts. That's more than 8 kilograms of filbert nuts, which are basically hazelnuts.
Ah, okay, so that's a different name for hazelnut?
I think to start off with, filbert nuts was the English word for hazelnuts, and hazelnuts was the American word. So they got through more than 8 kilos of hazelnuts between them. And actually, to use Mytton's own words, they set up to their knees in nutshells.
8 kilos of nuts. I mean, you would think that, you would get like severe stomach trouble or something with that.
You would think it wasn't that good for you. So he enjoyed riding, but he was reckless. He was completely bonkers. He could only ride at one speed, and that was flat out. He was convinced that whatever he was riding, it would clear whatever obstacle was in front of them. And that even extended to whether he was riding on the back of the horse or in a carriage behind the horse. And he was once out with a friend riding in a gig, which is a two-wheeled carriage that's towed by a single horse. And he said to the friend, "Was you ever much hurt then by being upset in a gig?" And his friend said, "No, thank God, for I never was upset in one." "What?" replied Mytton. "Never upset in a gig? What a damn slow fellow you must have been all your life." And running his near wheel up the bank, over they both went, fortunately without either being much injured. So he deliberately crashed the carriage just so that his friend could see what it was like.
Oh, see. No, I think that in those days, I mean, it was actually a very, very, typical accident, and with gentlemen who would be riding these kind of carriages, because it was something considered very sporty, and it was fast.
Yes.
If you had a good carriage horse.
Yes. So now he can speak from experience.
So I suppose, of course, there was if you were a very, very reckless or very fast rider, the definition was neck or nothing. You were neck or nothing rider.
Hold that thought.
That,
yes.
and another one is that you were a bruising rider. But I suppose of Mad Jack, you can say that he's bruising even in a carriage.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because the very next story that Nimrod talks about is that he went to buy a horse from a dealer, and he spent a lot of money. The dealers, every time they saw Mad Jack pull into a place, would think, "Oh, we're going to dine well tonight." But he was a very regular customer and spent a lot of money with them. But he would look to buy a horse from this particular dealer and asked the dealer, was he a good timber jumper? But he asked that as the horse was being put into a harness. So Mytton jumped into the carriage, whipped the horse forward, charged him at a gate. Now, you don't need to be an expert horse rider to see that wasn't the cleverest idea in the world. But apparently the horse cleared the gate just fine. The carriage, not so much so. But it seems like everybody was fine. The horse was fine. Mytton was fine. But the carriage was much injured.
You don't say.
Quite. But he was fond of a practical joke as well. I think he enjoyed the joke more than the victims of the joke did. For example, he had a lovely dinner one evening, saw off some of his guests. And again, these were guests that did not ride at the same breakneck speed. They were a lot more sedate, sober in their riding style. So he saw them off after dinner. They rode off towards home. He then scampered out of the hall, got onto his own horse, went a different route to them. So he overtook them, but going a different way, and then stopped. He disguised himself and had a pair of pistols and went, "Stand and deliver." Which is not something anybody wanted to hear in 1830.
Oh, good Lord.
But apparently they rode off and basically just rode their horses faster than they'd ever run before. But perhaps his cruelest practical joke was that one of the horse dealers popped round to see him one day to pick up payment for a horse he'd bought. The horse dealer was called George Underhill. So Mytton gave him an envelope and said, "Right, give this to my banker in Shrewsbury. He'll settle up with you." gave him the envelope. George Underhill went to this banker friend of Mytton's, handed him the envelope, who opened it. And this banker was also a governor of the local lunatic asylum. And it wasn't a banker's draft that Mytton had put inside. It was a letter saying, "Sir, admit the bearer, George Underhill, into the lunatic asylum. Your obedient servant, John Mytton."
Oh,
But he did love his horses. And it seems, albeit in an 18th century kind of way, he loved animals in general. So he had a pet bear. He had a pet monkey.
right.
And you can decide yourself how much of an animal lover he really was from this next couple of anecdotes. He once rode the bear into his drawing room in full hunting costume. Now, I've read that a couple of times, so I've had to make the note that it was Jack that was in the hunting costume, not the bear.
I wouldn't have put it past him.
Yeah. By all accounts, the bear was Bear.
Okay.
But the animal carried him very quietly for a certain time. But on being pricked by the spur, he bit his rider through the calf of his legs, inflicting a severe wound. So he didn't mind being ridden. He just didn't want to be kicked with spurs.
My
And who
sympathies
would?
are with the bear.
Absolutely right, yes. It seems, and big surprise, the monkey enjoyed a tipple as well.
Well, of course.
But one day, the monkey mistakenly took a bottle of Day and Martin's boot polish for something alcoholic, which turned the monkey blind and shortly after led to his death.
Oh, that's sad.
So, as a public health announcement, just for to keep the obscure on the straight and narrow, don't drink shoe polish, kids. It's as bad for humans as it is for monkeys. We do not condone the drinking of shoe polish.
Yeah, I think I'll start.
But he did have a range of racehorses. I'll say a little bit more about those in a moment. But one of his racehorses was a filly that was entered into a race called the Oaks, which is then and now the most prestigious race of the year for 3-year-old fillies. And he said, yeah, this is my filly. She's going to win. And when she wins, she's going to put the prize into my pocket herself. And the people that he said that to were, don't be daft. Yeah, the Mytton said, well, watch this then. He laid down at full length underneath the horse with his bare head between her heels, and I'm quoting Nimrod again, and first taking up one foot and then the other, placed them both in the pockets of his dressing gown.
Great.
Now, having said just that, it is going to shock you to hear me say that he wasn't very good at taking advice from other people.
Yeah, astounding. Such a,
Yes, quite.
break away from the norm.
Yeah, absolutely. But he was quoted as saying, "What the devil is the use of having a head on my own shoulders if I'm obliged to make use of yours?" Which is, I guess, fair enough, so long as you do actually make use of your own head.
Yeah, that would be kind of, you would presume that to proceed it.
But we've established he was a wealthy man. But he doesn't seem to have been as much of a gambler as I at first thought he was. He enjoyed a bet. He would have a bet. He would have a bet on his own horses. He'd have a bet on other people's horses. He'd play cards for significant sums of money. But he wasn't very good at keeping hold of money. And again, I'm just going to directly quote from Nimrod here because he puts it better than I ever could. "It was always his custom to have a large sum of money in his travelling writing desk, but it was more than usually large at this time, in consequence of his having broken the banks of 2 well-known London hells on the eve of his departure from London for Doncaster. He was counting this money alone in a carriage with the windows open, because of course you would, and he fell asleep. Now, he wasn't driving the carriage. The carriage driver would have been up top. So he was counting the money with the windows open, nodded off. And when he woke up, most of the money had blown out. But his response to that was, light come, light go.
Well, fair enough.
Which I guess was the 1830s easy come, easy go.
Absolutely. Speaking of the hells and the gambling, I mean, they are mentioned a lot in the literature of the time.
But these London hills, they were crazy places. It sounds like there were many of them, of the most crooked ones. The owners of the hells would allow the crookedness to take place for a slice of the action.
Oh, yeah.
So there was all sorts going on.
And you said that he was riding to Doncaster. Was there a race course there or something at the time?
Doncaster actually is the host of the oldest, what we call classic horse race. So yes, it was very much.
Very, very typical, kind of like, I'm loaded now, I can bet on horses.
So yes, Doncaster was very much a racing venue. So yes, he didn't mind losing his money. He was, by this time, he'd have been a really serious drinker. But one of the things I absolutely love is that Nimrod compares Mytton to somebody called the Earl of Rochester, who was quite a famous rake drinker.
Yeah, he was contemporary of Charles II.
I believe so, yes.
The Restoration Court, and he wrote very, very, very lewd plays and performed them in front of the king. I mean, he was audacious and absolutely willing to say anything.
But when Nimrod lists comparisons between the two, it says, if Rochester was this, Mytton was even more this. And one of the things it says is that Rochester spent 5 consecutive years drunk, but Mytton beats that by 7. So he spent 12 consecutive years drunk.
Yeah.
But in terms of his drinking, we talk these days about binge drinkers.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we could call Mad Jack a binge drinker. Because to me, a binge drinker is somebody who goes out on a bender.
Yeah.
He wasn't really that sort. He would start at breakfast.
Right.
He apparently opened his first bottle of port with his morning shave.
Okay.
I must admit, I enjoy a glass of wine, but I wouldn't be starting on the port before I'd shaved. If I was using a cutthroat razor, I'd shave, then start on the booze.
There wasn't any other razors available at that time.
But yeah, so then he kept going out. He would have a bottle at lunch, he'd have another at dinner, keep going until after he'd finished playing billiards in the evening. So he would drink a lot, but spread out through the whole day.
Yeah.
But Nimrod says it did him no harm. He was a memorable example of the comparatively harmless effects of very good wine.
Okay. So maybe this can be interpreted that apart from these mad pranks or something like that he wasn't sort of an angry drunk. So he would...
Well, to be honest, I can't get my head around it at all. I mean, I like the idea that very good wine is better for you than very cheap, very bad wine, particularly going back a couple of hundred years.
For sure.
But given that this particular example of the harmless effects of very good wine lived to the ripe old age of 37 in abject poverty, having squandered an absolute fortune, if that's your idea of a harmless life, then by all means go ahead.
Yeah.
He could be very, very generous. So he was quite mean with some of those jokes. Yeah, trying to get somebody sent to a lunatic asylum is not generous, but he could be absolutely generous. And bearing in mind, this was somewhere around 1830 to 1832. He was in Calais in France. Now, he only went to Calais in the later part of his life when he basically had creditors chasing him. So he wasn't super rich anymore, but he was in Calais and was in a silversmith's. And a French soldier came in to the silversmith's looking to sell a watch so that he could basically give some comfort to a sick comrade of his.
Mm.
Now, this was the other side. This was a French soldier, and the silversmith didn't want to pay as much as the soldier was asking. So Mytton, who just happened to be in the shop at the time, put the money down and said, I'll buy the watch.
That's very, very kind.
Yeah, no questions asked about the amount, just put the money down. But to add to the kindness, the soldier basically said, yeah, what do I say to such generosity? And Mytton basically said, don't say anything, but here, take this to your friend, and gave him the watch as well.
Oh my, well, that is generosity.
Yeah. But the next thing was that he was then talked into becoming an MP. And so he stood for election in the 1819 election for the seat of Shrewsbury. So he's still staying local to where he lived, where he'd been brought up. And it does look quite strange to me because there was one other candidate. And from what I could see, they were basically both standing on the same tickets. They both had very similar policies. But the big difference between them was that Jack had 10,000 quid to give away.
Ah, okay. Well, that helps in politics.
Which is about $750,000 in today's money.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened in those days was that it was perfectly legitimate to buy votes.
Okay.
So he polled 384 votes. So he paid out this, it was about £2,000 in today's money. It was about £2,000 per vote.
Okay.
And so that got him a seat in Parliament. He went down to Westminster, spent half an hour there, decided he couldn't hear and it was too boring, so never went back.
I understand him completely.
Yes. I think we both sympathise with him, but neither of us would spend £750,000 finding out we didn't like it.
Sake, no. I would have bought another horse.
Yes, quite. It does seem he was a bit hard of hearing, but when the next election came round, he declined. And I did actually find a website called historyofparliament.org because I wanted to look at who would he have been standing against. But there's a lovely quote in there that says basically his reason for not standing, because he was the incumbent MP, so he was standing down. The reason for standing down was that he finding that a proper and punctual attendance to his parliamentary duties was incompatible with his present pursuits.
How utterly polite. How incredibly British.
Yeah. Isn't it just? But in between that election and a little more than 10 years later, that was enough time for all of those pursuits basically to end up being lost. He lost the hall, he lost a lot of money because he was spending far, far more than he was generating. So he did end up, he lost both wives, lost the first one, she passed away. The second one, she left him, lost his daughter because she went to live with others, lost his other 3 children because they went with the wife. He lost his horses, his hounds, his house. So I absolutely love this. And I don't mean to upset anybody that might be listening outside of us two, but he actually wrote an open letter when he wanted to stand again to all of the constituents of the county of Shropshire. So the open letter was published in the Shropshire Gazette or whatever the newspaper would have been. And it said, I venture to offer myself to your notice as a candidate for the county, totally unshackled by prejudice or otherwise, and a strenuous advocate for reform. And just with those last few words, I was thinking, so even in 1831, when this election was held, there were dodgy candidates with little to no political experience or expertise offering themselves as candidates for reform. Some things never change.
Nope.
But it seems he didn't do that well in the 1831 election because he wrote a wonderful follow-up letter in the same newspaper. Yes, gentlemen, upon my soul, I thank you much for what you've done. Though at the bottom of the pole, I've too much bottom yet to run.
Does the bottom have other connotations? Except I think it was something to do with like having bravery, or it was also used in boxing cant, because boxing was another gentlemanly pursuit. And if a boxer was described as having a lot of bottom, it meant like he was very, very had a good fighting spirit or something of the sort.
Yes, yes. It was used even more in racing parlance.
Okay.
But meant almost exactly what you're describing. Because back in these days, or certainly a few years before these days, horse races tended to be quite long.
Mm-hmm.
And they would have more than one in a day. So a horse that had bottom was a horse that could run right the way to the line, even after 4 miles, even for the second time that day. And that's what they looked for more in a racehorse, was somebody with, I guess, stamina would be the best way to describe it, but stamina combined with courage, combined with the fighting spirit that you described for the boxers. It's that all of those all together was seen as the most valuable thing in a racehorse. so they did look for a bit of stamina. So he was saying, yeah, I'm not a quitter.
Mm-hmm.
Although he did then promptly quit, I have to confess. That was his last attempt to be an MP.
Yeah, okay. Not a great loss to his diary, I'm sure.
No, quite. Why he even wanted to go back into Parliament, who knows? But when he inherited the hall, he also inherited a lot of land.
Mm.
So he was a major landowner, which was given over to arable farming.
Yeah.
And he was quite successful. Certainly in his early years, he won prizes at agricultural shows. Now, I would imagine he won prizes by being kept a long way away from the farmland.
Presumably, yeah.
And having the right people look after. But there was one particular show, and I smiled so much when I read this. His grain won all of the prizes except for one particular field of barley, which was disqualified because it was found to contain wild oats. And even the judges found it hilarious that Mad Jack Mytton was disqualified because sowing wild oats just wasn't the done thing.
How appropriate.
But yes, he did love his horse racing. I've got down, and this is one of the things that I think his biographer quite enjoyed, horse racing as well, because he doesn't give the names of any of Mytton's children, but he gives the names of every one of the 45 racehorses that he owned over a dozen years.
Priorities.
He lists what races they won, how much the prize was. They won a total of 165 races. So quite successful, but it seems like he always paid too much. The races that he won were kind of middling races. He never won any of the really big races, never won the Derby, never won the St. Leger or the Oaks. So a lot of his races were fairly local to him. And basically, he paid too much for the horses. He paid too much to keep the horses, and the prize money was nowhere near enough. So he lost lots and lots of money doing that. But basically, he was spending money. Yeah, he was spending it on it blowing out of carriage windows. He was spending it on drink. He was spending it on the high life. He managed to get through this vast fortune. So by the time he was 35, basically his lack of prudence caught up with him.
Yeah.
And creditors came and took the hall away, and the hall and everything in it was put up for sale to settle his debts. It just so happens that Nimrod, the biographer, hadn't seen him for a while then. So there's a little bit of a gap there because Nimrod had moved to Calais. But on the 5th of November, 1831, so when Jack was 35, there was a knock at Nimrod's door, and when he opened it, it was Jack Mytton. And basically Nimrod saying, yeah, what on earth are you doing here in France? And Mytton's response was that there were 3 pairs of bailiffs hot on his heels. So he was basically just running away from his debts.
Oh, goodness.
Just to show how bad with money he was convinced that because his creditors had the hall up for sale and all of the effects, that basically he was going to end up with about £70,000 left over, which is about £5 million in today's money. After the sale of the hall and assets were complete. I mean, he couldn't have been wronger, but that was his belief, was I'm still a man of means. I just need to get over this little hurdle of everybody selling everything I own, and then I'll be back in funds again. So he was still managing to live the high life, still managing to convince people to, if you like, stand him the money, to loan him the money for him to host dinners in a fancy hotel in Calais and so on. But there was one particularly convivial evening that he had in a hotel in Calais where he had a lot of friends round and found that he was suffering from a bout of hiccups after it got to be bedtime. And what sort of cures would you use for hiccups?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is being like, startled or something like.
Yep.
Then you
I
have
think drinking a glass of water said to be one. Well, but we've both missed off the most obvious one, which is the one that Mad Jack went for, which was to say, damn this hiccup, and set fire to his nightshirt that he was wearing.
You can't fault the guy for originality. Unless he was going sort of a self-inflicted startlement, like, oh, good Lord, my jacket's on fire. With, like, with a candle or something. It's just absolutely mad.
I mean, he has got the excuse that he was drunk and had been for 12 years, but nevertheless, it's a pretty poor excuse. But luckily there were still friends in the room with him, and they managed to get the fire out before it had done too much damage. But he was really quite badly burned.
Well, I can imagine.
Properly badly burned, as you would expect, yes. But apparently, once they got the fire out, he said, well, the hiccup's gone. So whilst I am far from recommending it as a cure, it does seem to have worked.
Yeah. I will not add that to my list of self-help.
No. But when Nimrod came to see him the next day, he said he resembled a new singed bacon hog. Mytton used to show off about how he could withstand pain and how he could put up with things. And I think he probably did have quite a high threshold of pain. Think of him scrabbling naked across the ice when he was hunting ducks and stuff. He probably had a fairly high threshold. But the day after the setting fire to himself thing, Nimrod had a friend over for dinner. And Mytton he was kind of invited, but wasn't invited. It's like, look, I've got a friend over for dinner, but you stay in bed. You had a near-death experience. But Mytton made a point of, he went along to this dinner as well. But he didn't eat much. But to show how good he was with withstanding pain, apparently he only fainted twice during the evening. So he clearly wasn't very well. But his pain cure was more booze. He was drinking brandy quite heavily, still drinking port quite heavily. So everybody tried to keep him off the booze, but as soon as nobody was looking, he was back on it again.
Well,
his mother had found out. She'd tried to talk him off of the drink, so it really wasn't working. But he was clearly a confirmed unreconstituted alcoholic. I think it wasn't recognized as an addiction, as an illness or anything else. He was just fond of the booze, but it was recognized that it wasn't doing him any good, if you like. So they were trying to get him to live more healthily. He did actually voluntarily go back to England, because all of this had been happening in France, in Calais and the surrounding area. He went back to England to sign the paperwork to release the last of the estate. And he went back willingly because he thought that would release the last of his money. So then he'd be back in funds again. but he was still very much in debt. So he was taken off to Shrewsbury jail and then transferred down to the King's Bench prison in London, so debtor's prison. And he was released after a while. And given that he was of noble birth and all the rest of it, maybe there was just a token sentence.
Yeah.
But so he left prison, was walking across Westminster Bridge, met a female that he'd never clapped eyes on before, and said to her, "How do you do?" And she said, "Very well, thank you. How do you do?" And he said, "Where are you going?" And she said, "I don't know." So he said, "Well, come and live with me. I'll give you £500 a year."
Not Jane Austen exactly, but...
No, quite. Yes, not the most romantic liaison ever. And she was only 19.
Okay. Well,
but she was called Susan, and it might not be Jane Austen, but it was good enough for her.
Well, £500,
so she went back
to, heavens.
Yeah, yes, that would have been perhaps the clincher, not the 34-year-old wreck of a man that was in front of her, but the money that was promised alongside it.
Oh, yes. For sure.
But they did have the odd fallout, and apparently there was one particular spat they had where after the argument, Mytton had gone out. He'd been attacked and robbed about 27 miles from Calais, and because he'd had all his money taken from him, he had to start to walk home. So 27 miles, what's that, about 40 kilometres?
Yeah.
45 kilometres, somewhere around there. So it's a fair walk after you've just been beaten up and robbed.
That's a marathon.
So he started the walk, but he got to a lodging house part of the way along and managed to talk the landlady into bed and a meal. But when he asked for a drink, she said, "You're not getting free drink as well." So to buy the drink, he gave her the shirt he was wearing. So he got some gin. So he turned up at Nimrod's house with blood-stained trousers on and nothing else.
My friend is back.
Yes, quite. So he looked after him just to get him back square, and then sent him on his way back to Susan, where they made things up. But unfortunately, on the 29th of March of 1834, when he was still only 37 years old, it all caught up with him and he did pass away. So that, no matter how good the wine was, unfortunately, the combination of setting fire to his own nightshirt, the 12 years of constant drinking, possibly not too much down to the 8 kilograms of hazelnuts, but the combination of all of his lifestyle meant that he passed away at the age of 37 at the end of March in 1834. But he did have quite a grand funeral.
Okay.
And the funeral, as well as the hearse, there were 12 carriages, more than 70 cavalry, 4 trumpeters, and a large number of mourners as well. So he had a grand send-off, and although he died broke and broken, he had that lovely send-off, and he got a long-distance path named after him.
Well, everything considered, I think that's something that if you can report that you had that much cavalry and you had 12 carriages, that means that 12 sort of like, better families. Yes. Or something that would have attended. It would have been quite the deal, actually.
But yes, so that's my story of Mad Jack Mytton.
Well, he definitely deserves the route named after him.
Yes, indeed, yes. And obviously the point of the Obscure podcast is to try and get people that should be better known to be better known. I think he deserves that as well.
Oh, yeah, so, exactly. Yeah. For sure.